It's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes from Dave Edwards, who says, can someone become a racist without knowing because of a shift in cultural norms? I think the short answer to that is yes. I think someone can become a racist without knowing it because of shifts in cultural norms. I think a really easy to point at example of that is when members of an older generation express themselves or express their racial attitudes using language that in their day, when they were young, was considered acceptable, but now, as society's feelings and opinions on language and our sensitivities have sort of progressed, now it's no longer considered to be acceptable. For instance, like if you have a friend or a relative who is in their 70s or 80s and you hear one of them describe a black person using the word colored. That doesn't happen as much as it used to, but I remember when I was a kid, so we're talking like 20, 25 years ago, that was something that happened a lot, where people my grandparents' age or older would refer to black folks using the word colored, because when they were young, that was considered the more polite term for it than other terms. And they saw nothing wrong with it because that was their attitude when they were young. It was acceptable when they were young, and they didn't really, they either weren't aware or they didn't care that it was no longer considered acceptable, that attitudes and language had evolved since the time when that was acceptable. And I do think that is a form of racism. I don't think that it is malicious, but I still think it's a racist thing to say by our current standards. And I think that it is the responsibility of the person saying it, if they are corrected on it. If you know, grandma says, oh, that colored boy, and then you say, grandma, that's not really acceptable anymore. You shouldn't say that. You should say black person or African American person, and you really should try to avoid calling black men boys. There's a lot of loaded language, there's a lot of baggage attached to that word too. Like, if you explain it to them, then I think it's their responsibility to take that in. Like, once you've been informed and you've been told about it, and someone has said, hey, oh, by the way, maybe you don't realize, but that's a really hurtful, way to describe it. That's a really offensive way to describe it now. People don't call it that anymore. People don't use those terms like that anymore. I think it's your responsibility to change, if you care. If you care about whether or not people think of you as racist. The Nightmare Rider. Hi, Steve. Over the past couple of months, I have been putting a fair bit of thought into how religious moderates go about expressing their religious faith. Do you think that when criticizing religion and religious practices, more atheists should take into account how religion is adapted to culture instead of only what the Bible says? Do you think that there are too many atheist critics of religion who let their distaste of religious culture, however justified it may be, cloud their judgment when it comes to individual religious people? I think there are a lot of atheist critics of religion who are too eager to judge all religious people or all followers of a particular religion according to the worst examples. I think that happens a lot with Islam, and I think the main reason for that is because Islam is an out group, not just to atheists, but to people living in the West in general. Western Muslims are very much a minority, and countries where Muslims are the religious majority are in other parts of the world. Most of us Westerners have not lived in majority Muslim countries and don't really know about Muslim culture from a first-person perspective. So we treat them as an out group. As for the other part of your question, where you said, should we take into account how religion is adapted to culture, not just what the Bible says? Yeah, because how religion adapts to culture and religious culture, the culture of religious people, affects how they read the Bible, affects what they think the Bible says. There is no one correct reading of the Bible. The Bible is a book that, as is the Quran, as are many religious texts, it is extremely open to interpretation, even more so than other pieces of literature, because religious folks add that extra layer of, well, this is a message from God. So you're not just reading the Bible to figure out, okay, what does this mean? You're also reading it, if you're a religious person, if you're a Christian, you're reading it to think, okay, not only what does this mean, but what is this saying to me? What is the message that God is sending to me from this? What am I supposed to do as a result of what is written in this book. So that adds a different layer of interpretation to it. And your culture, the teachings that you receive from church or from your parents or from your fellow Christians will very much affect what you think the Bible says and what you think the Bible, what responsibilities you think the Bible is imposing on you as a Christian. So I think focusing on the culture is much more important, much more productive, and will give you a much more accurate picture of who you're talking to, what you're talking about, and why they believe what they believe and why they do what they do, than just saying, well, I'm only going to talk about what the Bible says. You need to first know what they think the Bible says and why they think it if you really want to engage and have a productive conversation. Ahoy year no! When I became an atheist, I also lost my belief in monsters. I used to be absolutely terrified of vampires until my early 20s. I used to be afraid of merely thinking Bloody Mary in front of a mirror, but now I can do that without breaking a sweat. Sweet Halloween gig. Which monster were you most afraid of, and does it still haunt you? Honestly, I was never afraid of supernatural monsters when I was a kid. I was afraid when I was a kid of more like serial killers or escaped convicts. I was very, I remember once when I was maybe 5 or 6, maybe even a little younger, there was a prison escape in my area. Someone who was like a violent criminal, not just somebody who was like, got pinched for like trying to rob a bank and ran away from the cops or escaped from prison, but like a murderer had escaped from prison and was on the loose in our general area. And I remember having just like these terrified visions of like a stranger walking past the kitchen window, thinking like, oh my God, someone's here. Like this person has come to kill us, So that's the kind of thing I was afraid of as a kid. If I was paranoid about anything as a child, it was that sort of a thing, not like vampires and monsters and stuff. So yeah, I am no longer menaced by imaginary escaped convicts. Thank you very much. Will Cook vexes illustration. I've just listened to The Thinking Atheist, where Seth speaks to the author of a manual for creating atheists. The author espouses a Socratic method of epistemology to help religious persons question their beliefs. He also denounces the standoff style of debating apologists as pointless for changing the minds of most. I have to say that I agree. I feel that the goal of atheists/rationalists should be to change minds and not to fight the opposing team. Your thoughts? I agree. I have not read the book. This is the book by Peter Boghossian that he's referring to, A Manual for Creating Atheists. I have not read the book, but I do agree with what you are saying in the question. I don't think that debates are very good for changing people's minds. I'm not saying that debates have never changed people's minds. I know there are probably people watching this who are atheists who maybe used to be religious folks whose minds were changed, or at least they were caused to think a little bit, that started them down a path by watching a debate. And if that worked for you, I think that's awesome. I think that's great. But to me, the most effective way of reaching a religious person is to just ask them questions. And not in the sense of an interrogation, but ask them why they think what they think, why they feel what they feel, why they believe what they believe. Because you're curious, because you want to know more about them. I honestly don't care what people's private religious beliefs are. I really don't. It's not something that I feel compelled to go out and if you are a Christian and you are leading a good life and you are not using your religion as an excuse to be a dick to people, and you respect the rights and the beliefs of others, and you're not trying to have your religious principles or your religious history taught in science class in public schools or any of that, I have no quarrel with you. I don't see you as an enemy, and I'm not trying to change anything about your life. As long as we have pluralism and equality and respect, that's what I want. I'm perfectly willing to disagree with religious people on whether or not God exists, as long as they are not using their beliefs as an excuse to dictate the lives of other people. Patrick Dodds. Steve, I have to phrase this question just right, so bear with me. While admittedly we have made social progress in this country, which has all been long overdue, I've noticed that some good values have gone the wayside, not because of the social progress made, but for reasons I'm not sure of. I'm not a sociologist. I'll give you an example. I've noticed that we've become inured to war, We're no longer appalled by the senseless, wasteful, avoidable destruction of this human activity. In the 1960s, protests of the Vietnam War had become synonymous for that era because they helped to end that destructive conflict. How many groups protest against the Afghanistan war in its 15th and counting year? Are there any positive values that you think have been sloughed off that you think we should consider readopting? I don't know if this is a value so much as it is an attitude or a way of looking at it, but I would love to see more Americans, no matter what their political persuasion, view the government as something other than their enemy. We have gotten to a point in our politics where many Americans, especially on the right, but not exclusively on the right, on the left in many cases as well, where they view the government as though it's like an alien invader that has conquered us and we are just living under its oppressive authority. And we don't really take pride in our government anymore. We don't take pride in the government as a creation and an expression of ourselves. The government is a tool that we should use to make our lives better, to make lives better for everybody who lives in this country. And it's something that we should take pride in and something that we should all take an active part in. The political process is something we should all participate in and make our voices heard. And it's something that we should work to make sure that all Americans are able to do that, so that all Americans are able to vote, are able to run for office or to take part in the political process in a way that their contribution will be honored and will make a difference. The government is ours. It's our government. It's not something that has been imposed upon us by something else. It's ours. We control it. We created it. We empower it. Our will empowers it. And the political process is something that we should all be able to participate in and that we should all want to participate in. Shadow Man 4710. Steve, speaking of the Joker, I know you've had very mixed feelings about Fox's Gotham. Did you watch season 2 and did you find it considerably better than season 1, as many of us did? Are you planning on watching season 3 at all? Yeah, it was a lot better. I think it was better early in the season. I think by the end of season 2, it had really gone off the rails. There were plots in season 2 that just ended up going nowhere. Like, spoiler alert, by the way, if you haven't seen Gotham season 2 and you don't want to know what happens, but when they brought Galavan back from the dead as Azrael, and then they just killed him off again after like 3 or 4 episodes, and he didn't even really have, like, they built up this, but like there's going to be this reckoning between Azrael / Galavan and Gordon, and then it never really happened. Galavan came back as Azrael. He was Azrael for like 2 or 3 episodes, and then they just killed him again. It just felt like it went nowhere. It was just pointless. And there were a lot of plots like that in Gotham season 2, where it starts out really promising. They start out like, oh, they're really going to go somewhere interesting with this, and then it's like, what were we even doing here? Like, they completely forgot what they even were trying to accomplish with that plot, so they just were like, fuck it. So that was a problem. The show was a lot more fun in the early going of season 2, I should say. It really seemed to capture that sort of goofy, campy, over-the-top energy that I think is the show that it should be. You know, the Penguin like ranting about stuff, completely going over the top, chewing the scenery, really outrageous plots, outrageous stories that are played mostly straight-faced. I think that is a good way for this show to go, and I think it started moving in that direction at the beginning of season 2, and then again it kind of lost focus. But yeah, season 2 is a lot better than season 1, and I will watch season 3. We'll see what happens. Becca Hawkins, hey Steve, let's say somehow you ended up in first century Palestine and you suddenly became fluent in ancient Koine Greek and Aramaic and any other local dialects. While there, let's say you came across Jesus. What sorts of questions would you ask him? If it were me, I'd show him a New Testament written either in its original Koine Greek or in an Aramaic or even Hebrew translation, and ask him if all that was said about him is accurate. I think your idea is a pretty good one. Show him the New Testament and say, okay, how much of this is you and how much of this is just completely made up? I would be fascinated to find that out. And I would also say, you know, as long as you're preaching and as long as you're giving a message that is obviously going to resonate with people down the road, people are going to write down things about you and write down things that you said, and that is going to shape the thought of people in the West for thousands of years. Could you maybe say a little bit more about, slavery or about women's equality? Because those are going to be problems in the church that is going to be founded based on your teachings in the next few thousand years. If you could come out like super hard for women's equality, that would be awesome. If you could come out just guns blazing, unequivocal, no question about it, that you are against slavery, like free your slaves now. Slavery is not cool. That would be great. So maybe I wouldn't ask Jesus questions. Maybe I would make some demands. It's typical pushy atheist. I'll go back in time, I'll find Jesus, he's actually there, he's real, and I'll start pushing him. I'll start making demands. So you need to say this, and you need to say this. That's what I would do. Chris Hanson. Hey Steve, I need your help. I have been varying degrees of socially conscious since I was about 16. In that time, I always prided myself on not losing hope for a better tomorrow. I hate pessimism. To quote Conan O'Brien, pessimism is too easy and it doesn't work. However, over the last year or so, I have begun to crack. Between Trump getting the nomination, police brutality, gun violence, and our decision to do nothing to stop it, and the looming threat of climate change disaster, not to mention the fact that we can't even agree it exists, I don't know if I can keep it up much longer. I've always believed that staying informed is part of the admission price for democracy, but lately it's been heartbreaking. On top of that, the love of my life was just diagnosed with stage 3 leukemia. I feel like I barely have my head above water. What do you do when you feel overwhelmed by your life? Any help, advice would be greatly appreciated. First of all, let me say how sorry I am about your love of your life being diagnosed with leukemia. That is just awful, and I hope for the best with that, and I have nothing but sympathy and support for you, so please know that. As for what do I do when I feel hopeless or depressed, well, I do feel that way, first of all. Actually, when you describe at the beginning of your question the things that make you pessimistic or the things that make you feel depressed and hopeless, that's my list too. That's my list too, which you probably know if you watch my stuff. But I'll tell you what I do that makes me feel better. I take that sadness, I take that depression, I take that hopelessness, and I turn it into determination. And I say to myself, if this is going to get any better, then I have to be one of the people that helps it to get better. Even if it's just in a small way, because I don't have a lot of resources. I have a platform on YouTube, I have an audience, but it's not a huge audience. I don't have a huge footprint. But I can do what I can. I can use what I have to do what I can, to try to send positive messages, to try to signal boost people who are saying important things, to try to raise awareness among people in my audience about issues that I think are important, that I think they should be interested in, that I think they should join me in working to address, or support those who are working to address them. I try to do what I can to make a difference. Most of the time it works. I can acknowledge the awfulness of the problems that we face. I can acknowledge how huge the mountain we still have to climb is, but I can also tell myself, yeah, but if you want to climb the mountain, you better start walking. You better start climbing. You can't just stand at the bottom of it and look up at it, because you'll never get to the top. If it's a mountain you want to climb, if it's a mountain you have to climb, then you better start climbing. And that resolve, that decision, that looking at it as motivation, I think really helps. At least it helps me with my depression. It helps me to not get bogged down and to not give in to pessimism. I don't know if that helps you at all, but I hope it does. And I hope things turn out for the best for you and for your love. And now, cue the thunderclap.
The lightning round. Rapid fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
Because we don't need no stinking segues. W. Mark Locker. Steve, what is your criteria for picking questions to answer, Mr. Gruff? It has to be a question that I feel like I have an interesting answer to, and it has to fit within the 30 minutes of the video. It has to fit within the size of my script that I impose on myself, and it has to fit within the running time that I have imposed on myself for these videos. That's pretty much it. Blackie Comics. Hey Steve, I have a question. Who's your favorite Looney Tunes character and why? And please answer this one, please! Well, I noticed that your user pick, your profile pick is Daffy Duck. So I want you to know I'm not just saying this because that's your user pick. I'm not trying to pander to you, but my favorite Looney Tunes character is Daffy Duck. I love Daffy. Daffy's my favorite. I love Bugs too, but if I had to pick, I think Daffy's my favorite. Joshua Purvis. Hi, Steve. My question is, what do you think about Randy versus Brock at SummerSlam? And I enjoy your videos. Thanks. Well, thank you, Joshua, for saying that. I feel like it's a match they just picked for name value. It's a marquee match. I don't know if there's any... I'm sure they'll come up with something, but right now there's no issue between Randy and Brock. There's no reason for people to want to see Brock Lesnar fight Randy Orton. Like, what's the benefit? What happens? Does one of them get a title shot if they win? Does Brock get something if he beats Randy? Does Randy get something if he beats Brock? There's no story behind it at this point. It's just, hey, here's a big name famous wrestler who's going to fight another big name famous wrestler. And that, in this case, that by itself doesn't really compel me. So we'll have to see what they do as we get closer to SummerSlam. Jack Coyer, if you were forced to keep only 5 amendments to the U.S. Constitution and immediately discard the rest, which would you keep and why? Oh, Jack, god damn. 5? That's all okay. I would keep the first, the fourth, the fifth, oh God, the 15th and the 19th. Why was I holding up 6 fingers? Yeah, those are the 5 I would pick. But can I have 6? Can I have 7? Because there's some that I left out that are super important that I really would love to have in there. But yeah, I guess if I can only pick 5. The hardest part is picking only 5. And I would pick those 5. But those aren't enough. Those aren't enough. Terry James, we just passed the 20th anniversary of the formation of the New World Order. What wrestlers do you think were the best members of the NWO? I am an originalist when it comes to the NWO, and I think the original 3 were the best and were the best version of the group and were the most compelling version of the group. And once they started adding people, it just got more and more diluted from there. When the Giant turned and joined the NWO for the first time, I think that really kind of just... it changed what it was, because the NWO was originally supposed to be outsiders. It was supposed to be people who were former WWF guys who were coming in to take over. And then the Giant, who was a WCW mainstay, turned, and then it just became just another heel stable. And yeah, so that's what I would say the original 3. Radical Bacon, I got attacked by a deer last week. How do I take revenge? Here's what you do. You find out where the deer lives. You find out where the deer's home territory is, and then just go out into the woods or wherever and just pee on everything. Just pee on everything. Mark your territory in the deer's territory. It will piss that deer off so much. You have no idea. Sakara 1974, what's your take on George Takei describing Sulu being revealed as gay in Simon Pegg's script for the new movie is really unfortunate? I can see both sides. I understand why George would not like that, because when he played Sulu originally, he was not playing Sulu as gay. He did not see Sulu as a gay person or a closeted person. So I understand why George feels the way he feels about revealing that the new Sulu is gay. But at the same time, I think it's great that the new Sulu will revealed as having been gay the whole time, as having been openly gay. Like, it's not like Sulu's going to come out in the new movie, at least not from what I've heard. I haven't seen the movie yet, but the way it's been described, it's not like Sulu's going to come out as gay and everybody's going to be like, Sulu, we had no idea. It's going to be revealed as having been a part of his life for his entire life. He's going to be married, he's going to have a child, everybody's going to have known about it all along. It's going to be like, no big deal. And I think that's great. But I can see George's side of it. The Thunder Atheist, Steve, question, if you had a choice of time machine, would you choose a TARDIS or a DeLorean? I would choose a DeLorean because Doctor Who just was not a part of my childhood. And Back to the Future was. And I never really, as a kid, I never thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a TARDIS? I always loved the DeLorean. I loved the Back to the Future time machine. So that's the one I would choose, because that's the one that I sort of grew up with and I've always thought of as that cool time machine. Secular Scholar, if the thing with the thing does the thing to the thing at that time in that place, what will happen? Something will happen. Who knows? It could be anything. But something will definitely happen. Joe McClory, would you mind describing or naming your favorite episode of each Star Trek show? Also, how would you rank the movies? Okay, favorite episodes of Star Trek. Star Trek Original Series, favorite episode? Maybe Amok Time, we'll go with that. Star Trek The Next Generation, favorite episode? Chain of Command, the two-parter. Deep Space Nine, favorite episode? The Visitor. Voyager, favorite episode? We talked about it last week. It's a good episode. Let's go with The Fall. And then Enterprise, favorite episode? The one where they found the comet in the first season. I think it's called Breaking the Ice. Those are my favorite Star Trek episodes of all the series. And how would I rank the movies? Let me see. Star Trek 2, Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek 6, Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek 2009, Star Trek 4, Star Trek 3, Star Trek Insurrection, Star Trek 5, Star Trek Nemesis. No, wait, Star Trek the Motion Picture, then Star Trek Nemesis. Did I leave any out? I don't think so. So there you go. Those are the rankings off the top of my head. I apologize if I left one out or if the order is a little fucked up, but that's just where we're going to land on that. That's it for the questions. Everything's done now. It's all over now but the shout-out. It's time for the shout-out. And the shout-out this week goes to a blog, and it's an awesome blog, and it's a blog that you may be familiar with if you've been paying attention to the atheist community, to the YouTube atheist community in the last few weeks. The blog that I am shouting out is the awesome Pathos blog titled Barrierbreaker. It's the blog of Martin Hughes, who has recently drawn some attention to himself by kicking the hornet's nest that is the issue of racism in YouTube atheism, which is a big problem. It exists. It's a very obvious problem to most people who view it from the outside. Unfortunately, quite a few of the extremely popular YouTube atheists, including the individual who is the most popular YouTube atheist, have espoused very, very, very offensive racist attitudes in addition to misogynist attitudes and rape apology and all kinds of really just vile, awful stuff. But Martin has done incredible work bringing that to people's attention, criticizing those very toxic, very harmful, very regrettable elements of the atheist community online, particularly on YouTube. He is way more patient and way more tolerant of digging through that stuff and engaging with those people than I am capable of being at this point. So I applaud him for his good work. I applaud him for his terrific, powerful writing. And if you want to get also a little bit more of a sense of who Martin is, I had him as a guest on this channel a few weeks ago. You can watch the video that we did together where I sort of interview him. We have a conversation. That is on this channel as well. I will link to that video, and I will also link to his Barrierbreaker blog in the description of this video. So check out Martin Hughes and Barrierbreaker. Could not recommend him highly enough. I also want to recommend, as I always do, the Lemme Listen podcasts. These are podcasts created and hosted by my very good friend Jason Harding, Jason with a D here on YouTube, the creator and star of Opinionville. He is the maestro of a whole family of podcasts, including the original Lemme Listen podcast, which is Lemme Finish, hosted by Jason and Finite Atticus. There is American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, the really, really hilarious improv comedy podcast that I guest starred on last week that is now in its second season. There is Cinema Shack, which is a really, really funny movie review podcast that is now a part of the Lemme Listen family. And there is Late Seating, the movie review podcast that is co-hosted by Jason and myself, where we review old movies, classic movies. We give them a fresh review. We decide whether they deserve their reputations for good or for bad. It's such a fun show to do. It's one of my favorite things that I do is the Late Seating podcast. So if you enjoy what I do, check out the Late Seating podcast. Check out all of the Lemme Listen podcasts, which you can hear in all of their glory by going to LemmeListenPodcasts.com, and I really, really, really recommend that you do. Well, that is it for this week, everybody. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your excellent questions. Before I go, I want to remind you to please leave a comment on this video to ask me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until then, take care, everybody. And one more thing, as usual, before I go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it, share it, subscribe to this channel if you're not subbed already, and also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.